The series opens with an introduction to the history of the futuristic space world that it is set in. Cylons, machines created by man for the purpose of labor, got advanced enough as artificial intelligence. They then staged an uprising against humans and waged a bloody war which eventually ended in an armistice. However, in a surprising turn of events, the Cylons left humanity's home worlds, collectively known as 12 colonies of Kabul, and there were decades of peace where the Cylons were simply never heard from. It has been 40 years since the devastating war between mankind and their Cylon creations. An officer, Boxman, flies out to Armistice Station as the ambassador to the United Colonies of Kabul in his shuttle. As is typical, the station is deserted, but he sits at his desk as has been the procedure for decades. Unexpectedly, he is woken up by the door opening on the Cylon side. A tall blonde woman, a number 6 model humanoid Cylon, walks into the room, escorted by 2 mechanical Centurion guards. She asks him if he is still alive, kisses him, then warns that the war has begun as the station is destroyed by missiles fired from the Cylon delegate's base star. Galactica is being prepared for its formal decommissioning and conversion into a war museum. Over 50 years old, Galactica is the oldest battlestar in service in the colonial fleet and served for most of the Cylon War. The crew go about their daily routines as a press tour is being held by civilian Aaron Dorrell, LT. Kara Starbuck Thrace does her morning jog, CMDR. William Adama practices a speech, SBCS. Calendar Henderson, Prasna and Sosinas have finished repairs of the port flight pod's new glass window. Rather than their signature CQB, the Marines are all unarmed and in their fatigues. Adama enters the Combat Information Center and is informed by LT. Felix Gita about the overdue armistice officer, but Adama thinks little of it. Call. Saul Tig goes off duty and immediately takes out a drink, his functional alcoholism being familiar enough to the crew it is not worth commenting on. Adama soon leaves the Combat Information Center to inspect the museum itself on the port flight pod. The deck crew under Chief Galen Tyrell present to him their authentic Mark II Vipers, one of which being a Viper he once flew. Prasna also gifts him an archived photograph of Adama as a major, standing with his 2 sons Leland and Zach. Officers off duty meet in the recreation room, where there is drinking and triad playing. Among the players are LT, Sharon Boomer Valeri and her Eco, LT, Carl Hilo Agathan, Starbuck, Tig, and Cag Madge, Jackson Spencer. Tig teases Starbuck about her callsign, and it likewise asks about his estranged wife. When Starbuck wins the game and celebrates, Tig knocks the table over and is instinctively punched by Starbuck, who is placed under arrest and ordered to the brig. Tig meets with Adama in his quarters to discuss the issue, and the formal charges are dropped owing to Tig starting the fight, though Adama decides to keep her in the brig until it is time to disembark. In Caprica City, Secretary of Education Laura Roslin concludes a doctor's appointment where she is formally diagnosed with breast cancer and recommended an immediate course of drugs. She continues with her duties for the day and departs for Galactica on board Colonial Heavy 798, set to arrive in 5.5 hours. She meets with a civil servant, Billy K4lled, who is to brief her on the event, but leaves for the restroom to be alone. Elsewhere in Caprica City, another number 6 walks along the city's Riverwalk Market. She observes a baby boy and snaps his neck as his mother is distracted before walking off. Dr. Gaius Balter is being interviewed by Caprica 5 anchorwoman Kellen Brody over his recent work for the Ministry of Defense and his views on advanced computer technology, banned during the Cylon War due to hacking concerns. Following this interview, he has sex with the number 6, who is revealed to be his lover. Back on Galactica, Adama's son Leland, now CPT, Leland Apollo Adama, arrives in a Mark 7 Viper, having been arranged to take part in the ceremony. He is unfamiliar with his father's preference for outdated modes of operation, such as lack of auto-landing procedures, and makes a poor first impression with Tyrell. Nearby, Boomer's Raptor is brought into the hangar deck after a bumpy landing, which Boomer blames on a faulty primary gimbal. The two argue their way into a locker and begin kissing, being in a secret relationship. Meanwhile, Apollo and many of Galactica's pilots meet at the ready room for briefing on their planned ceremonial fly past. Meanwhile, in Caprica City, Balter and the number 6 walk along the Riverwalk once more, where he gloats about the success of his new command navigation program, which was rewritten by the 6 to give an advantage to her employer's contract, and insults her monotheistic beliefs. The two go their separate ways as 6 brings a briefcase to meet her unseen Cylon contact. Colonial Heavy 798 arrives on Galactica for the ceremony. As Roslin is given directions by Dorrell, K4lled becomes lost after being distracted by Petty Officer Anastasia Duella. He follows her to the head where he asks for her help. Rosalind meanwhile meets Adama and quickly begins arguing with him over having a networked computer system installed on Galactica to assist with giving directions. She mocks Adama for his perceived fear of computers, but he admonishes her for her need to install networked computers for such a trivial reason, reminding her the Cylon War only happened because of the massive reliance on networking, and how he feels integrating within Galactica is an insult to the ship's crew that fought and died in the war. Elsewhere, Apollo visits the brig after hearing Starbuck is there. The two exchange pleasantries, having not met since Zach's funeral 2 years ago. She learns Apollo hasn't seen his father since then, and still blames him for his brother's death. Starbuck is offended by his comments, which she feels treats her engagement to him as insignificant in comparison, and he is forced to leave. Back on Caprica, the number 6 wakes up Balter as he lies in bed with a defense employee. Though hurt by his casual cheating, she is instead there to reveal the truth to him. On Galactica, Doral leads the press into a wardroom, where Adama and Apollo are to be photographed in their dress uniforms. After they leave, Adama keeps Apollo back, hoping to talk things over, but Apollo continues to address him as an officer, and not a father, adding further insult by bringing up his mother Caroline is to remarry. Adama is still hurt by the funeral, and insists he has no fault as accidents happen in the service. Apollo accuses him of pressuring Zach into the service, and using his connections to pass him through flight school despite shortcomings, ending with "you killed him." The argument ends there, with Apollo walking away to prepare for the fly past. Elsewhere on Caprica, Balter is having trouble accepting Six's claim to being a Cylon. She convinces him she is telling the truth after reminding him she wanted access to the defense mainframe. He rushes to call his lawyer to protect him from a potentially treasonable offense, but she finally reveals that humanity's children are returning home today as a nuclear explosion is seen from afar. On Galactica, Doral leads the decommissioning ceremony, and after the fly past gives the podium over to Adama. Having prepared and practiced a speech on sacrifice, he is reminded again of Zach and begins a passionate ad hoc speech instead, questioning mankind's deserving of survival in the war, and the refusal to accept responsibility for the Cylon's betrayal. Apollo himself hears this broadcast in the Mark II, knowing it is really about Zach. The speech is a success. With the ceremony over, Colonial Heavy 798 takes off back to Caprica, escorted by Apollo, while the rest of the Vipers on the fly past head on out with Boomer's Raptor for reassignment. Balter stands in his house nervously watching news coverage of multiple nuclear bombings on the planet, until they too quickly cease. Out of options, he pleads for evacuation, but Six reveals she will simply download her consciousness into a new body, and that there are in all 12 models of Cylon. Another explosion occurs, close enough for the shockwave to spread out towards the house. She sacrifices her body protecting him from the explosion. On Galactica, Adama is resting his quarters when he receives a phone call from Gita in the Combat Information Center. A message has been broadcast unencrypted, reading "Attention all colonial units, Cylon attack underway. This is no drill. The ship is put on Condition 1. Preparing it for combat." Adama informs the crew of the recent news of the attacks, and that Picon Fleet headquarters has been destroyed, with the fleet now under the command of Admiral Negala on Atlantia. Though the enlisted men and women are ready for combat, Galactica is far from the rest of the fleet, and without ammunition. Hida is ordered to keep track of any known contacts, friendly and enemy. Tig is ordered to look up any munitions depots they can replenish from, and Duella is to give orders to Spencer's squadron. Starbuck is given a reprieve and ordered out of the brig. These orders are quickly carried out. Gita reports that Negala's fleet is engaging over Vergen. Hilo identifies raiders approaching the squadron, but sensor jamming makes it hard to get a count, and Starbuck reports back for duty. Based on new information, 30 battlestars, a quarter of the fleet, have already been destroyed. While they have around 20 Viper pilots left on Galactica, they are short on Vipers, and the deck crew is forced to quickly prepare the Mark II museum pieces for service by dragging them to the launch bay. Back at the Combat Information Center, Dee and Gotta look over new reports being faxed in, which show an unusual number of equipment failures, with even an entire battlestar losing power. The Viper squadron, reinforced by the Raptor, meanwhile approaches the Cylon forces. The Raptor is unable to provide much help due to jamming, but ultimately concludes there are only 2 raiders in range, with 2 more squadrons further away. As they approach, the raiders use the command navigation program backdoor hack to disable the Mark VIIs, then fire missiles which destroy them all without suffering any damage. Boomer turns the Raptor around to evade the raiders. On Colonial Heavy 798, Rosalind returns from the restroom finding there is something happening, but the crew are not telling the passengers anything. The pilots in the cockpit are aware of the Cylon attack, however, and are being protected by Apollo, though he himself has his doubts in fending off the Cylons in a museum showpiece. The Raptor is taking evasive action as the raiders that destroyed the Viper squadron come after them next. Several missiles are fired at them, and they use the Raptor's electronic countermeasure equipment to scramble them. One final missile is left, which cannot be shaken off. Boomer fires a comm drone, which it destroys instead. While the Raptor is spared destruction, it is damaged by the explosion nonetheless. It has a hull breach, there is a fuel leak, and Hilo is wounded debris. They cannot repair the Raptor from the inside, and Boomer steers the craft on a course for Caprica, turning off its engines so it appears to be debris on Cylon Drades. Back on Galactica, Adama provides more information to the crew. Caprica City has been destroyed in a nuclear bombing, and there are reports of similar bombardments on Arelon, Picon, Sagittarian, and Geminon. The attack on Caprica City alone raises the death toll to 7 million. Roslin enters Colonial Heavy 798 Seconds cockpit. Having heard on a passenger's wireless that Caprica has been nuked, the crew's ploy has been foiled, and she makes it her responsibility to give out the full details. The captain is ordered to contact the Ministry of Civil Defense to offer assistance. Based on current information available to her, Toron has also been hit. Roslin orders the passengers to begin taking inventory checks and clearing room for taking on more civilians. Doral is distrusting of Roslin and sees her as an interference in the ship. But as Roslin is a member of the cabinet on a government ship, she insists she has legitimate command. Back in the cockpit, Roslin gets in touch with Jack, a government worker on Caprica. President Richard Adar is missing but believed to be alive, though the colonial government is no longer capable of verifying this. Adar is revealed to have offered an unconditional surrender to the Cylons following the Picon Fleet HQ bombing, which was ignored. Apollo warns the ship's captain about an inbound Cylon missile, and his Viper flies towards it to lure it away. Spinning the Viper 180 degrees, he is able to fire at it and destroy it harmlessly, but his Viper is disabled in the process. On Caprica, Boomer performs maintenance on the Raptor's fuel line, relying on their onboard manual. Hilo stands watch, counting 6 nuclear detonations. Soon he hears the sound of screaming from afar, and the 2 officers ready their sidearms, as a mob of refugees flee towards them carrying whatever possessions they could, amongst the crowd being Gaius Baltar. On Colonial Heavy 798, Doral welcomes Apollo aboard, and warns Apollo about Roslin's takeover, encouraging him to replace her. The 2 arrive to find Roslin planning a cargo transfer with the captain to make room. She explains to Apollo that the space lanes were ordered closed after the attack, meaning a number of civilian ships are stranded in the middle of space and potentially suffering from power problems. Apollo accepts her authority, much to Doral's dismay, and is given orders to check out navigational charts for a good place for the civilian fleet to hide. Hilo fires a warning shot at the refugees. They ignore his protests that they are not on a rescue mission and reject offers of bribes. Ultimately, they agree to take on children and 3 more people. To determine the 3, they cut a page of the manual to shreds to use as lottery tickets. Galactica begins launching its Mark II Vipers as another 2 raiders approach. Starbuck, the squadron leader, is unable to accompany them due to a fault in her Viper. After 3 aborts, Prasna is ordered to rip out the broken valve as there is no time. Galactica's engines fire up to take it out of range of the raiders as Starbuck finally launches. The 2 raiders are agile and evade the Vipers, but Starbuck destroys one as it attempts to disable her with the virus. The second raider destroys a Viper and fires nuclear missiles at Galactica. Starbuck takes out 2, but misses the third. With no time to double back, the Vipers break off to avoid the explosion. Starbuck flies over Galactica's port flight pod and reports the forward section has sustained heavy damage, spotting decompression, and fires. In the Combat Information Center, medics treat injured crew while the others continue their duties. With information coming in from Gita, damage control units are sent out to the flight pod to put out the fires. Tig plots on a map of the ship where the damage is, reporting in the violent decompressions are ripping open the hull further down. Adama orders Tig to take personal charge of the DC units while he deals with the further problem of the ship's rear engines unable to be turned off. A yellow-clad DC unit moves on down a smoke-filled corridor, fighting the flames while evacuating injured enlisted men and women. Prasna, in his DC suit, calls into the Combat Information Center to report further decompressions to Tyrol. who is coordinating from there. They simply do not have adequate equipment to handle the fires. Kelly orders that other DC teams converge on the port flight pod to assist, but Tig belays the order. There is no time to rely on crews to migrate, and instead orders the sealing off of the minimally affected areas and vent their atmospheres to stop it spreading further. Tyrell reluctantly carries out this order, and over 100 people are left to fend for themselves, with some being visibly ejected into space. On Caprica, the lottery is completed with an elderly woman winning the final ticket. Hilo recognizes Balter in the crowd as he considers stealing it. Knowing his scientific brilliance, Hilo stays behind on Caprica, giving his seat over for him. The decision infuriates the refugees, who feel both cheated and despaired by losing their chance. Balter spots a number 6 in the crowds, but she vanishes when he looks back. The door closes and the Raptor takes off, with Hilo forced to shoot a man who tries to force open the door. Meanwhile, back aboard the Galactica, its commander, William Adama, assumes command of the few remaining assets of the colonial fleet. He decides to make a faster-than-light jump to the Ragnar anchorage, a military armory station where the Galactica can resupply itself with weaponry and essential supplies to get it back into fighting shape. On Colonial Heavy 798, the Case Orange broadcast is received, which Roslin explains is an emergency computer transmission sent out when the president, vice president, and most of the cabinet are confirmed dead. Roslin orders them to transmit her ID code, D456345. After, Roslin rests in the empty passenger deck, where Apollo talks with her. She explains she knows most of the cabinet personally, many having come with her from when Adar was mayor years earlier. The captain arrives and hands over a fax which determines Roslin, as the senior surviving cabinet member, is the legal president. A priestess, Alosha, swears in Roslin in view of the press, making it legal. On Galactica, Tyrell and another DC party enter the fire-burnt corridor to treat the wounded who survived with breathing apparatuses. At Combat Information Center, Adama talks over with Tig, learning 26 survived while 85 did not. Tig moves on to report he has finally completed his earlier order, and has tagged Ragnar Anchorage, a military surplus yard in orbit over the gas giant, Ragnar, as the best spot to replenish their ammunition. Back at the port flight pod, Tyrell finds Prosna's body on top of a weeping collie. Despite the fire-retardant clothing, his face has been charred by burns. Tyrell reports the deaths into Adama, and is ordered to set up a morgue at the hangar bay. Instead, Tyrell complains about Tig, and how a 40-second delay could have saved them. Adama does not reprimand him for calling Tig a son of a bitch, but defends his XO as making the right decision. With Tyrell gone, Tig reports that Ragnar is 3 days away at best speed. Adama orders a specialist to provide him a map for plotting a faster-than-light jump. In the following scene, Starbuck's Viper is brought onto the deck in poor condition caused not by combat, but by Prosna's repair job. Starbuck insists he get the repair job done, but learns he died in the fire with 84 others. As she leaves, Chief Tyrell informs her about Apollo's apparent death, and that Boomer is missing. Boomer is piloting the Raptor in space, having successfully evacuated civilians. Firing out a communications drone, she hopes a colonial warship will determine their location through the Cylon jamming. Elsewhere on board, Dr. Gaius Balter is haunted once more by the number 6, who quickly disappears once more. On Galactica, the ship is prepared for an FTL jump. As a result, the flight pods are retracted. Using an artificial wormhole, the ship instantly finds itself in orbit over Ragnar, close to Anchorage. Roslin's fleet survived the nuclear explosion, though Roslin and the Colonial 1 crew were briefly knocked out. Running down to the cargo bay, they attend to Apollo, who explains he used Galactica's electric pulse coils to trigger an early detonation of the missile, tricking the Cylons into thinking it exploded on contact. Galactica moves into Ragnar's orbit, passing through the eye of a storm. Starbuck returns to her bunk, where she tearfully prays to the Lords of Cabal over a photograph of Apollo. Kelly passes through the hangar deck, taking dog tags from men and women under his command as more bodies are brought in. Galactica successfully docks with Ragnar Anchorage, and Tyrell leads Colley and other deckhands to recover the munitions, as Marines, still in fatigues, search the area. They are confronted by an armed man. On Colonial 1, Boomer's Raptor successfully docks and disembarks its passengers. Boomer warns Apollo that Cylons are somehow shutting down the systems of the more up-to-date vessels, having received on the wireless that obsolete craft have fared better. As Balter leaves the Raptor, he is introduced to Roslin to serve as a scientific advisor, while Boomer is ordered to jump around the system and bring FTL-capable civilian ships to the fleet. On Ragnar Anchorage, Tyrell tries to calm down the armed man, who is unaware of the war. The man demands to have access to a ship he can escape in, but gives up and is disarmed. Balter sits on the passenger deck, studying the recent changes to the command navigation program. He is visited again by the six from before, but he insists she is merely a figment of his imagination, though she suggests there is a chip in his head. While she gives him some help, she also offers him her love and kisses him, before disappearing again. On Ragnar Anchorage, Adama discusses matters with the man, who shows him around. He explains away his missing spaceship as being on the other side of the space station, and that he is an arms dealer who is stealing from the depot. As the two examine a crate of nuclear warheads, a bomb being transported by the crewman detonates. The two survive, but are cut off by debris, and must find their own way back to Galactica. Rosalind's fleet is complete, with Boomer bringing the last of the ships she can find. Rosalind briefly visits the passenger liner, Botanical Cruiser, where she negotiates supply and power distribution with the captain. She talks with Cammy, a Capricorn girl who is unaware of the attacks, before leaving for Colonial 1. A raider jumps nearby and then leaves, meaning the Cylons now know the location of the fleet. In an emergency meeting, Doral is opposed to abandoning the sublight ships, while the captain insists they transport as many people as possible to the FTL-capable ships. Time is limited, and Rosalind concedes to Apollo's recommendation they simply abandon the sublight refugees and jump to Ragnar before they too can be destroyed. Along with Billy, Rosalind reveals her cancer diagnosis and feels sick with herself for only thinking about it, and not the wider picture. Billy informs her that the Botanical Cruiser is a sublight ship, meaning Cammy will die. The FTL ships are quietly sent coordinates to Ragnar to avoid the sublight ships even trying, which would risk exposing them if boarded. The radio messages are filled with pleas for mercy, prayers, and curses to rot in hell for the betrayal. The raiders jump in and fire enough nuclear missiles to destroy every ship within seconds. On Ragnar Anchorage, Adama and the man continue moving through accessways. The man, already sweating earlier, is now suffering painful headaches and is too tired to walk straight. He comments on mankind's folly and that God created the Cylons to make up for the mistake, though Adama is not interested in such talk. At Combat Information Center, Tig is briefed by Gita they have another 3 hours before they can expect a full resupply. Duala reports the arrival of the civilian fleet, which briefly sends Galactica to action stations until they are confirmed civilians. Rosalind comes aboard Galactica to meet with Tig, and tries to convince him the war is already over, and Galactica's priority should be to protect the refugees. Tig refuses the order, but concedes to 2 disaster pods being given to the civilians, and orders Apollo to the flight deck as their new CAG. Tyrell returns from Anchorage with supplies and has a crewman report to Tig on Adama's whereabouts. He sees Boomer pass the man and they embrace. Balter and Billy make their way through the ship looking for the Combat Information Center, and run into Duala, who kisses Billy and gives him the tour as before. Apollo reaches the hangar to meet Starbuck, who is fixing her Viper by herself. He heads off to the squadron ready room, and considers Starbuck's request to inform Adama that he is indeed alive. In Anchorage, Adama and the man continue down a flight of stairs. The man reveals he has no allergies, and Adama understands the truth. He is some kind of humanoid model Cylon, and Ragnar's radiation is causing problems for his body. He thinks Adama already knew about the radiation, and has led the colonial fleet into Ragnar for protection. Finally, he reveals he is capable of uploading his consciousness upon death to a server, and resurrecting into a new body. Adama believes him, but doubts he personally can do so, suspecting the magnetic radiation is preventing it, leaving him to die a slow death. The man attacks Adama, and they fight over hot pipes. Though the man has superior strength, Adama is able to best him and beat him to death. In the Combat Information Center, Balter explains to Gita that the Cylons used the command navigation program to infect the colonial fleet ships with a computer virus. Gita adds that his Galactica has not got command navigation program up and running due to the lack of networking, but the installation tool is around. The Six appears over him and mocks him for his hubris and narcissism, and he struggles to hold a conversation with both her and Gita at once. As Gita goes back to work, Six shows Balter around the Combat Information Center and steers him towards a Cylon device planted on the DRADIS console. He concludes there must therefore be another Cylon agent on the ship. Balter begins walking around the Combat Information Center to get a closer look at the device, but cannot reveal what it is without having to explain how he knows about it. Doral interrupts Balter as Six teases him, and convinces him someone must be implicated as a Cylon agent to get the device revealed. He considers Doral, how he is not a member of the crew but has had unrestricted access to the Combat Information Center for weeks, meaning he very well could be the agent. Nearby, Adama is being looked over by a medic as 2 Marines bring in the man's body. Keg is informed about the existence of humanoid Cylons, and reveals to him about Apollo's survival. Adama finds his son waiting for him in his office. Baltar meets with Tig and Adama on the autopsy results for the man in Anchorage. The results confirm him to be synthetic in origin, meaning there could be many more Cylons in the fleet that resemble humans. Baltar feigns ignorance and offers his services to the military in finding more Cylons. He is ordered to absolute secrecy to prevent Galactica and the fleet falling to paranoia. In the hangar, Starbuck is ready to launch on a reconnaissance mission. She reveals to Apollo his brother Zach failed his basic flight course, and she passed him due to their relationship. Kelly and 2 Marines arrest Doral as he walks around Galactica. Baltar explains to Tig he performed discrete tests on everyone in the Combat Information Center and identified Doral as synthetic. This gives him the opportunity to casually bring up the device on the DRADIS console, which Doral denies knowledge of. Tig leaves the room to observe the device's removal. Dita apologizes for not informing him of the device, which he noticed a week earlier, but presumed to be part of the museum. The device is taken over to Baltar for study, and Tig orders a search of the ship for any other mystery equipment that just appeared. Starbuck flies out of Ragnar's atmosphere through holes in the storm, soon falling out of radio contact. In orbit, she confirms there are base stars lying in wait. Adama meets with Roslin as she discusses resupplies with Billy. Their new item of discussion is what to do with the convicts on Astral Queen, and Roslin refuses its captain's suggestions of summary execution. When he leaves, Roslin demands to know if Adama will stage a coup. When he denies this, she takes it as confirmation that she is the recognized president. Adama still, however, refuses to commit Galactica to protecting the fleet, and suggests they stay in the atmosphere while Galactica fights the Cylons. Roslin rejects his idea, and insists they must instead abandon the star system behind and take the 50,000 survivors to another planet to settle on. Starbuck flies into the storm to warn the Combat Information Center of 2 base stars, and heads back. Adama and Tig discuss the new developments, theorizing the Cylons did not feel they needed the whole fleet, and can starve them out with only 2, due to the radiation interfering with the fleet. Galactica also must leave the storm and approach the base stars before it can jump. Apollo, Tig and Adama change to talking about the civilian fleet. Leaving them in Ragnar is no longer viable, and they cannot accommodate 50,000 on the ship. They have no choice now but to fight the Cylons in orbit, and escort the civilian ships out to the distant Promer sector. Galactica prepares to leave Ragnar Anchorage, and leaves Doral behind. Galactica leads the fleet out of the storm, and readies its weapons. Its point defense turrets begin firing, creating an anti-air wall to keep the raiders and missiles away, while railguns fire explosive shells at specific targets. The Vipers are launched and engage raiders on the other side of the firewall. 2 are destroyed and Apollo's is damaged but operable. The Cylons are distracted in their fight, which allows the refugee fleet to exit the atmosphere and jump away. Galactica is hit multiple times by missiles striking the flight pods, and it becomes clear that if they stay any longer it will be unable to function as a battle star. The Vipers are ordered to land, with Starbuck pinning her Viper with Apollo's to push it into the flight deck. In the aftermath of the battle, Adama attempts to lift the morale of the surviving humans by announcing plans to reach a legendary 13th colony, Earth, whose existence and location have been closely guarded military secrets. Roslin later convinces Adama to privately admit that his announcement was simply a ploy as she believes Earth to be a myth. Adama finds a slip of paper in his quarters with the typed statement, "There are only 12 Cylon models." On Ragnar, Doral clearly appears to be suffering from radiation poisoning that has been shown to affect only Cylons. His identity as a Cylon is confirmed when a group of Cylons, including the metallic Centurions and several humanoid Cylons consisting of multiple copies of the number 6, Doral and Ragnar Arms dealer models, come to retrieve Doral. In a twist ending, one of the group appears the same as Boomer, indicating that her counterpart on the Galactica is a Cylon as well.